Hey Mustangs, in this video we're going to be taking a close look at the connection between energy and metabolism. So that's the key concept, the key thing that you want to remember as we go through this video. How are energy and metabolism connected, and what is metabolism? So first, energy. So all living things require energy. What is energy? So you should be thinking about that. So all living things require energy. Why do living things die if they do not get energy? So living things need a constant supply of energy. And if they don't get that constant supply, at some point they stop getting energy, they die. So why is that? Why do living things die when they stop taking in energy? So something to think about. And free energy is the energy that's available to do work. So all living things rely on free energy. They can take in energy, but they have to be able to get that energy out of where it's stored and be able to use that energy. And that's what free energy is, the energy available to do work. And that's what living things rely on to stay alive. And then there's chemical energy. And this one's huge. So chemical energy is energy stored in chemical bonds and molecules. This is how energy gets passed around. This is how organisms obtain the energy that they need. They get it in molecules. So molecules have energy stored in bonds. Some molecules have more energy stored than others. So that's why some molecules are more sought after as energy to provide energy for a living thing than others. Specifically things like carbohydrates. So you should remember that one, that carbohydrates are the main form of energy that living things rely upon. So chemical energy is any energy that's stored in the chemical bonds of molecules. So if we take a look at this molecule here, this is glucose in this case, and when you take a look at it, in between the bonds, that's where energy gets stored. So energy is stored in the chemical bonds of molecules. Now, what is the main source of all energy? The main source of energy for all life on our planet is the sun. And from there, living things are able to trap that energy from producers. So producers or autotrophs are the organisms, the only organisms that are able to trap energy from the sun and convert it into chemical energy. So they trap solar energy and convert it into chemical energy that is then passed along in a food chain. So from there, the energy is passed from living thing to living thing in the form of chemical energy, in the form of molecules such as glucose. So a little bit more in-depth look. So if we take a look here, the energy from the sun is the main source for all life on our planet. So solar energy is converted by autotrophs. So autotrophs or producers convert energy from the sun. And when they convert that solar energy, they convert it into organic molecules. When we talk about organic molecules, we're talking about carbohydrates, such as glucose, lipids, proteins, even nucleic acids. So all of those are large molecules that have energy stored within them. So solar energy is converted into organic molecules. Some of those organic molecules transfer their energy into other molecules, such as ATP. And then the organic molecules are what get passed along in the food chain. So when we say an organism will die if they don't get energy, if they don't eat, we know that if an organism doesn't eat, that it's going to die. So here an herbivore comes along and it eats the plants, and the organic molecules are passed along to that herbivore. And the herbivore will store energy in some of those organic molecules, but they'll also break it apart into and store energy in ATP and use energy from ATP. And then continuing with the food chain here, we see a carnivore. When they eat the giraffe, organic molecules get passed on to them, and they can do the same thing. They could store some of their energy in the form of organic molecules, or they could break those organic molecules apart and store energy in ATP. And in ATP, it's always short term. We'll get into that in another video. All right, so chemical reactions. To really understand what's going on with energy and metabolism, we have to understand what's going on with chemical reactions. Because chemical reactions are where you can break apart and build molecules. So if energy is stored in those molecules and you're breaking them apart and rearranging them, you're doing something with the energy as well. You're either storing energy or you're releasing energy during chemical reactions. So when we look at a chemical reaction, two main parts to it. You have an equation basically. On the left you have the reactants. These are the molecules that will be broken apart and rearranged. You have the arrow that tells us that a chemical reaction is occurring. Then you have the products on the right. These are what is going to be made. So the reactants get torn apart and rearranged into the products. So we have this here, CH4, 2 O2, gets you carbon dioxide and 2 water. So here's the actual molecules Remember, energy is stored in the bonds of these molecules. So when we break them apart, rearrange them, we're releasing or storing energy depending on what's going on. So here, they get broken apart and rearranged. That's what the arrow tells us. A chemical reaction is occurring, and you get your products. Okay, so these get torn apart and rearranged into your products. So living things do this all the time. That is what your metabolism is all about. It's what's going on with these chemical reactions. So you are constantly, and all living things, you and all living things are constantly breaking apart molecules and rearranging them, and thus releasing and trapping energy. All right, so laws of thermodynamics, since we are talking about energy here. So the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So energy is not created or destroyed, only transferred or transformed. So that's what plants do. Plants do not make their own energy. They take energy from the sun and they convert it into another form. So they're not making their own energy. They're just converting energy. So that's what plants do, and they're following the first law of thermodynamics. And then there's the second law, which is entropy. So here with entropy, it has to do with disorder. For every chemical reaction that occurs, it increases disorder. And as a result of that, energy is lost. So what we see is for every chemical reaction that goes on, that energy is not perfectly transferred. So when we talk about transferring and transforming energy, it's not everything that you start with. All the energy you start with doesn't make it to the next step. Energy is lost every single time a chemical reaction occurs. Most of that energy is going to be in the form of heat. So when this chemical reaction occurs here, and these molecules are broken apart and rearranged into these over here, energy is going to be lost in the form of heat. Okay, so that's the second law of thermodynamics. For every chemical reaction that we see happening here, that's what applies in this case. Energy is going to be lost in the form of heat. So it's not perfect. Chemical reactions aren't perfect. They don't perfectly transfer all the energy. Some energy is always going to be lost. All right, so what exactly is metabolism? Most people think of it this way. You hear people say stuff like, oh, I have a fast metabolism and stuff like that. Metabolism is not just the breaking down of your food. That's usually what people think of when they say, oh, I have a fast metabolism, and they're usually thinking, oh, I break down my food very quickly, you know, something like that. But metabolism isn't just about breaking down your food, it's also about rearranging it as well. So building new things. So your metabolism is a combination of two different types of reactions going on, and it goes back to chemical reactions. So if you're breaking your food apart, that's what you think of originally when you think about metabolism, when you break your food apart, you are doing a chemical reaction. You're breaking molecules apart. But then you also build molecules too. That is also metabolism. So breaking apart your food and rebuilding that stuff with new molecules, those chemical reactions are your metabolism. So when you look at metabolism overall, it involves energy changes. So energy is either stored in chemical bonds or released from chemical bonds. So again, think about those chemical reactions. When you take molecules and you break and you rearrange them, you're either releasing or you're storing energy. And that's what your metabolism is doing. You either break apart molecules to release energy or build them and store energy. So all these molecules, such as glucose here, store energy, but you can break them apart in order to release energy. So the two things that I was talking about in the previous slide, where I said that you either break apart or you build, it's anabolic pathways and catabolic pathways. So anabolic pathways, catabolic pathways, two things you really need to know. So first, anabolic pathways. Anabolic pathways is where you actually build molecules. So you take simpler molecules and you put them together to build more complex molecules. So anabolic pathways are building. So it should sound familiar. So when we learned about macromolecules, we talked about how you can take monomers and connect them together and build something bigger. That's an anabolic pathway. So anytime you take monomers and you build big old macromolecules, you're doing an anabolic pathway. And this happens inside your body all the time, inside of your cells. So here in this picture, we have two monomers, monosaccharides here, and we're going to connect them together and form a bigger molecule from them. So two individuals come together here. That's an anabolic pathway. We're taking simpler molecules and connecting them together to build a bigger one. And this should sound familiar to you as well. This is dehydration synthesis. So this is where water is being lost. So to dehydrate is to lose water here. So dehydration synthesis, water is lost in order to connect these together. Okay, so building molecules is anabolic. Other examples, whenever you build proteins, when you connect together amino acids to build proteins, that's anabolic. When you build lipids, that's anabolic. When you connect together the nucleotides in DNA, that's anabolic. So building is anabolic. All right, and then key things to look for to see if a metabolic pathway is anabolic. Is it building, or the fancy word synthesizing? And if it requires energy. It takes energy to build molecules, okay? Think of it, if you have, you wanted to stack pennies, and you have a whole bunch of pennies laying on your desk in front of you. If you just stare at them, nothing's ever going to happen. But if you want to build them into a stack, you need to put some energy in order to get the stack going. So anabolic pathways are the same thing. In order to build, it takes energy to build, okay? And then there's catabolic pathways. Catabolic pathways is breaking down molecules. So should sound familiar again from when we learned about macromolecules. So when you break apart larger molecules, so if you're breaking apart your macromolecules down into the monomers, so reverse, break down the macromolecule into the monomers. This is hydrolysis. So you use water to break the bonds back down to simpler molecules. So catabolic pathways break down molecules into simpler ones. So break down big molecules into simpler molecules. So key things to look for is breakdown or decomposition. Sometimes it's referred to, if you break apart a molecule like this, it's referred to as decomposition instead. This is also hydrolysis that we see happening here. And then these release energy. So when you break apart molecules, energy is released. And this should make sense. If it took energy to build the molecule, that means in an anabolic pathway, that means there's energy stored in those molecules. So in an anabolic pathway, you put energy in to build it. When you break it apart, you release that energy. So that's the connection between these two as well. So anabolic and catabolic coupling. So you can use catabolic reactions to basically start or give energy to anabolic reactions. So here, if we break apart these molecules, let's say these shapes represent molecules here, so you break them apart. When you break it apart, you release some energy. That's catabolic, breaking it apart. That energy can then be used in an anabolic reaction in order to build molecules. So catabolic, releasing energy, can be used to build anabolic. All right. Now, because we're focusing on energy, so when we talk about metabolism, it's connected to energy here. So you have building, which is anabolic, breaking apart, which is catabolic. And we said that in anabolic, in order to build, you need to put energy in. And then in catabolic, when you break apart, that releases energy. So we can also categorize those using two other words. So we can say exergonic reactions. So going back to our chemical reactions here. If you are breaking apart molecules, think exergonic, EX for exit. So an exergonic reaction is saying that the reaction is releasing energy. So exergonic releases energy, think EX for exit. So chemical reactions that release free energy. So any catabolic pathway is going to be exergonic, it's going to release energy. So when you take a look, you have to be able to understand these graphs here. So this is the amount of energy. So right here, this is the amount of free energy. And this is the progress of the reaction. So in an exergonic reaction, you see the reactants here. The reactants have a lot of energy. When you break them apart in catabolic pathway, the products have less energy. Because when you break apart the reactants, it releases energy, and the products therefore have less energy as a result. So you broke it apart, energy got released, the products have less energy. So that's why we see it like this. Okay? And then we go on to endergonic reactions. Endergonic, think END for endo, think in. So endergonic are reactions that are going to absorb energy. So endergonic absorb energy should sound familiar from what we just talked about. So those are going to be your anabolic reactions. So anabolic trap energy when the molecules are being built, strung together in order to build a more complex molecule. So endergonic absorb energy. So here what you see if you're looking at a graph, so this is the amount of energy and this is the reaction. So you can see here the reactants don't have as much energy. So if you look over here, the reactants don't have much energy, but the products have a lot. Why do the products have a lot? It's endergonic. Energy is going in. So as you connect together smaller molecules to build something bigger, the reactants have less energy, but you put energy in, and the products have a lot more energy.